She was not supposed to be the one standing there calm, and that is exactly what made everything stop. The morning outside a quiet suburban home in Virginia looked ordinary at first glance, with soft sunlight reflecting off parked vehicles and a calm residential street that gave no hint of what was about to unfold. A woman in her mid-30s stood near her front steps holding a simple folder of documents, her posture steady, her expression controlled, as if she had already anticipated the pressure building around her. Her name was Angela Carter, a state attorney known for her sharp legal mind and calm presence in high-pressure situations. She had just stepped outside to leave for work when the situation escalated in a way no one expected. Within minutes, multiple patrol vehicles began to arrive, surrounding the property in a wide perimeter that immediately shifted the atmosphere from peaceful to tense. The officers moved with procedural precision, communicating through radios, positioning themselves carefully, and focusing their attention on Angela as she remained still on her front walkway. Among them was Officer Daniel Reed, a man in his early 40s with years of field experience, known for his strict adherence to protocol and his firm approach to compliance situations. His expression remained serious as he approached, maintaining professional distance while assessing the scene. Angela did not raise her voice, did not make sudden movements, and did not show panic. Instead, she asked calm clarifying questions, her tone steady and measured, as if she was already analyzing the legal structure behind the encounter unfolding in front of her. The officers requested identification and clarification regarding a reported issue tied to a mistaken alert that had been escalated through dispatch channels. As the conversation continued, it became clear that conflicting information had triggered a response that was not fully verified. Angela slowly reached into her folder, retrieving official documents that she stated were relevant to the misunderstanding, including credentials that indicated her position within the state legal system. Officer Reed paused briefly, scanning the documents with growing uncertainty, while the other officers exchanged glances that reflected confusion rather than confrontation. The situation remained controlled, with no raised voices and no physical escalation, but the tension came from something deeper, the realization that a procedural error may have led to a highly sensitive encounter. Angela maintained her composure throughout, her gaze steady, her voice consistent, and her body language calm as she emphasized the importance of verifying information before escalating enforcement actions. As the interaction continued, a separate phone call was made from Angela's side, connecting her to a higher level of federal oversight through a professional contact within military legal coordination channels. The call was brief but formal, and within minutes, the atmosphere began to shift again as officers received instructions to reassess the situation with updated context. The presence of authority expanded beyond the immediate scene, introducing a broader layer of jurisdictional review that changed the tone of the encounter. Officer Reed stepped back slightly, reviewing the new information, while Angela remained in the same position, unchanged in posture, as if she had never doubted the outcome would move toward resolution. The early morning silence returned slowly, not because the situation had disappeared, but because it was now being carefully re-evaluated under corrected understanding. The early morning calm outside Angela Carter's suburban home began to shift into something more structured and controlled as additional police units completed their perimeter positions, each vehicle aligned with procedural precision that suggested a coordinated response rather than a spontaneous action. The air felt heavier not because of any visible threat, but because of the growing awareness that multiple systems of authority were now involved in a single unresolved situation. Angela remained near her front steps, holding her folder close to her side, her posture unchanged, her expression steady, as if she was carefully observing the behavior of an unfolding system rather than reacting to it emotionally. Officer Daniel Reed maintained his position a few feet in front of the group, speaking intermittently into his radio while receiving updates from dispatch, his tone controlled but increasingly cautious as new information failed to fully align with the original report that triggered the response. Around him, other officers adjusted their position slightly, forming a wider containment arc that kept the scene secure without escalating physical confrontation, their attention divided between Angela and the evolving communication channels feeding them instructions. The neighborhood remained quiet, with only distant movement of early commuters and faint sounds of suburban life continuing beyond the perimeter, creating a stark contrast between ordinary environment and extraordinary procedural focus. Angela finally spoke again, her voice calm and precise, asking for confirmation of the exact basis of the escalation and whether all identification protocols had been verified before deployment. Her question did not carry emotional pressure, but it introduced a legal clarity that shifted the tone of the exchange, causing Officer Reed to pause briefly before responding with measured uncertainty. He acknowledged that the situation was based on an initial alert that had been escalated through multiple layers of communication, but he also admitted that some details now appeared incomplete or inconsistent. As this exchange continued, Angela's earlier contact with federal-level coordination began to produce visible effects through updated radio transmissions arriving to the officers in real time. The language of those transmissions changed the atmosphere subtly, replacing assumptions with verification language, and introducing the need for immediate reassessment of the operational context. Officer Reed lowered his radio slightly, glancing toward the house and then back toward Angela, his expression shifting from authority-driven certainty to procedural caution. Angela did not move from her position, but her presence now felt different within the scene, as if her identity had begun to register at a higher institutional level beyond the immediate encounter. The officers behind Reed adjusted their stance, no longer treating the situation as a standard containment but as a developing verification case requiring external confirmation. Despite the increased presence of authority, there was no aggression, no physical escalation, only a growing sense of recalibration as systems of communication worked to correct earlier assumptions. The suburban street, once calm and ordinary, now existed as a controlled environment of layered authority, where every update, every transmission, and every observation was being re-evaluated in real time under a broader jurisdictional lens. The early morning outside the suburban neighborhood feels unusually still, as if the air itself is holding its breath. A black woman named Angela Mercer stands just inside the front doorway of her home, her posture steady but alert, her eyes carefully tracking every movement outside. The street is lined with multiple patrol vehicles, their presence forming a tense perimeter that blocks the quiet residential road. Officers remain positioned at a distance, communicating in low voices through radios, while maintaining a cautious stance that suggests uncertainty more than control. Angela does not raise her voice. Instead, she speaks calmly through the partially open door, asking for clarity, asking for fairness, and asking for someone to explain what is happening. Her tone is controlled, not emotional, as if she understands that precision matters more than volume in moments like this. Inside the home, the lighting is warm and ordinary, contrasting sharply with the cold stillness outside. Family photos on the wall and everyday objects on the counter remind her of the life she is protecting by simply standing her ground. One officer steps slightly forward, then pauses, as if receiving updated instructions through his radio. The situation appears to be evolving in real time, shaped by unseen communication channels that extend beyond the street. Angela remains composed, her breathing slow, her attention focused not on fear but on detail. She reaches for her phone and places a single call, not in panic, but in a deliberate and measured way. The name she says into the phone carries weight, though she does not raise her voice to emphasize it. Within moments, the atmosphere begins to shift subtly. Some officers exchange glances, adjusting their stance, as if new information is being confirmed at a higher level. The tension does not disappear, but it changes texture, becoming more procedural than confrontational. Angela does not move from her position at the doorway. She listens carefully, her expression unchanged, as if she is prepared for either outcome. The neighborhood remains silent, with no civilians present, only the distant hum of engines and the occasional radio transmission breaking the quiet. Every second feels extended, as if time itself is slowing to allow verification and review. The officers maintain their positions, but their urgency appears to lessen slightly, replaced by caution and reassessment. Angela's calm presence contrasts with the uncertainty outside, creating a moment where authority, identity, and communication intersect without resolution yet being reached. The situation is still unfolding, and nothing has been finalized, but the direction of events is beginning to shift toward clarification rather than escalation. The presence of law enforcement outside Angela Mercer's home continues, but the atmosphere has clearly shifted from immediate confrontation to structured reassessment. Officers remain positioned along the street, yet their movements are slower and more deliberate, as if waiting for confirmation from a higher authority before taking any further steps. Angela stays at the doorway, maintaining the same calm posture, her attention focused on the exchange of information happening beyond her direct view. Inside her home, nothing has changed physically, but the contrast between the quiet interior and the controlled tension outside feels even more pronounced. The situation now appears to be driven less by urgency and more by verification, with communication flowing through radios and phones among multiple levels of command. One officer steps back toward his vehicle, speaking briefly into his radio, while another adjusts his stance near the sidewalk, scanning the surroundings without approaching the house. Further, Angela does not retreat or advance, she remains steady, holding her position as if she understands that patience is part of the process. Her earlier phone call seems to have triggered a chain of responses, though the details of those responses are not visible, only reflected in the behavior of those on the street. The officer's body language suggests increased caution, with fewer abrupt movements and more waiting. A supervisor appears to arrive on scene, pausing near the center of the formation to receive a brief update before observing the house directly. The conversation among officers remains low and controlled, indicating procedural coordination rather than escalation. Angela's expression remains composed, neither defiant nor fearful, but attentive, as if she is carefully observing how information travels through the system around her. The morning light continues to brighten the neighborhood, casting clearer visibility on the vehicles and the quiet homes nearby, reinforcing the unusual nature of the gathering. Despite the number of units present, there is no physical movement toward entry or escalation, only reassessment and communication. The tension that previously filled the air now feels more suspended, like a decision has been paused rather than executed. Angela's focus does not shift away from the officers, but her posture suggests confidence in the process unfolding. Every few moments, radios crackle with updates, and officers subtly reposition themselves to maintain structure while awaiting final instruction. The scene remains unresolved, but it is no longer chaotic. It is controlled, monitored, and increasingly dependent on confirmation rather than assumption. Angela continues to stand at her threshold, a fixed point of calm in a situation defined by procedural uncertainty, as both sides remain in a state of waiting for the next definitive directive. The situation outside Angela Mercer's home begins to shift again as additional confirmation reaches the officers on scene. The previously cautious stillness is replaced by subtle reorganization, with personnel adjusting positions as if receiving updated instructions from a centralized command. Structure. The supervisor who arrived moments earlier steps slightly away from the main group, listening carefully through his radio before responding in short, controlled phrases. Angela remains at her doorway, still composed, her presence unchanged despite the evolving activity around her. There is no movement from her side toward escalation or retreat, only observation. The officer's attention is no longer focused solely on the house itself but appears divided between the residents and incoming communication updates. A second wave of coordination is visible as one officer retrieves documents or digital information from a vehicle-mounted device, scanning it briefly before relaying details back to the group. The tone of the scene remains procedural, marked by verification rather than action. Angela's earlier call continues to influence the situation indirectly, though the content of that communication is not revealed, only its impact through the behavior of those present. The spacing between officers becomes more structured, forming clearer lines of responsibility rather than a loose perimeter. The neighborhood remains quiet, with no civilian movement disrupting the scene, heightening the focus on the controlled coordination taking place in front of the house. Angela's expression remains steady, reflecting awareness without visible reaction. The officers occasionally glance toward her, then back to their communications, as if aligning their understanding of her identity with the new information being processed. A brief pause follows as the supervisor appears to confirm a key detail, causing a noticeable stillness among the group. Radios quiet for a moment, then resume with shorter exchanges, suggesting that instructions are being finalized at a higher level. Despite the number of vehicles present, there is still no physical escalation toward the residents, only a continued adjustment of posture and procedure. The environment feels increasingly defined by confirmation rather than uncertainty, with each officer waiting for the next directive to be fully authorized. Angela remains in place, neither challenging nor withdrawing, her calm presence contrasting with the structured activity unfolding outside. the entire scene stabilizes into a state of controlled assessment, where action is suspended and decisions are being refined in real time through layered communication channels. The afternoon light outside the quiet suburban home had shifted into a heavier shade of gold, casting long shadows across the driveway as the situation continued to unfold with increasing tension but still contained within strict procedural boundaries. The woman stood near the entrance of her home, maintaining a calm and composed posture despite the surrounding presence of multiple patrol units positioned at measured distances. Her expression remained steady, her focus directed toward understanding the unfolding process rather than reacting emotionally to it. The officers on site maintained communication through radios, coordinating in low tones as additional verification requests were processed through standard channels. There was no sudden movement, no escalation in physical terms, only the steady rhythm of protocol being followed while uncertainty lingered in the air. Inside the residence, the environment was orderly, with subtle signs of interruption but no signs of chaos, suggesting that whatever had initiated the response had not disrupted the home beyond the immediate threshold. One officer approached the front steps and paused, reviewing documentation on a handheld device, then spoke briefly to confirm identity verification steps that were still in progress. The woman responded when addressed, her tone controlled and clear, providing information that aligned with official records being checked in real time. The communication network between local units and higher authority channels remained active, and it became evident that the situation had attracted attention beyond the immediate jurisdiction due to the nature of her credentials. As confirmation cycles continued, a shift occurred in the atmosphere, subtle but noticeable, as officers began to adjust their stance from uncertainty toward recognition of a higher-level authorization connected to her identity. A secure call was initiated to verify additional clearance, and within moments, the process escalated to a federal coordination channel. The response time was unusually fast, indicating that the information being reviewed carried significant institutional weight. During this interval, the woman remained still, her composure unchanged, her attention focused on the procedural steps rather than the growing gravity of the situation. Conversations among officers became more measured, with fewer assumptions and more deference to incoming instructions. The term hold position was mentioned, not as an act of aggression but as a procedural requirement while confirmation finalized. Inside the network of communications, her designation was being cross-checked across multiple secure databases, and it became increasingly clear that her professional standing was not routine. The shift in energy was not dramatic but it was unmistakable, as the structure of authority in the scene began to reorganize itself around new information. Even the ambient sound of radio seemed to soften as instructions changed tone from directive to advisory. The woman finally received acknowledgement from a senior coordinating voice through one of the officer's devices, and the interaction that followed was brief but precise, confirming her identity and status in official capacity. The officers adjusted accordingly, stepping back into a posture of respect and procedural closure rather than inquiry. The scene remained controlled, quiet, and stabilized as the response from higher authority finalized the situation, signaling that the matter had reached resolution through verification rather than conflict, and the environment around the home gradually returned to stillness as the presence of uncertainty dissolved into formal acknowledgement. The tension outside the suburban home had reached a point where even the air felt heavier, as if the entire street was holding its breath while waiting for something irreversible to happen. The black woman stood calmly near her front porch, her posture steady despite the surrounding presence of multiple police vehicles, their lights reflecting off nearby windows like silent warnings. Her expression did not show panic, only controlled focus, the kind that comes from understanding procedures more than fear of them. The officers maintained distance, communicating in short, restrained exchanges, unsure how to proceed without escalating a situation that had already attracted unusual attention. What none of them fully understood was that every decision made in those moments was being tracked through multiple channels beyond the visible scene. Inside her home, the environment remained undisturbed, a contrast to the organized chaos outside, where protocols were being questioned in real time. The woman had already made one quiet phone call that changed the tone of everything, and now she waited without urgency, as if she had already seen how the next sequence would unfold. Minutes earlier, the call had reached a secure contact associated with high-level military coordination, a connection not typically activated in routine law enforcement encounters. On the other end of that line, the response had been immediate but measured, indicating that verification processes were already in motion. Meanwhile, the lead officer attempted to maintain authority while also managing uncertainty, aware that something about this situation did not match standard expectations. Radios transmitted brief updates, but each new piece of information seemed to slow rather than clarify the response. The presence of multiple patrol units created an unspoken pressure, yet no one wanted to act without confirmation. As time passed, subtle changes in posture began to appear among the officers, small signs of reconsideration rather than escalation. The woman remained composed, her gaze occasionally shifting toward the street, not in fear but in observation, as if she understood exactly how long institutional responses typically take to align. Inside classified communication channels, her identity was being cross-referenced, and what emerged from those checks began to shift the tone of urgency into something closer to caution. She was not treated as a suspect in the conventional sense, but as a figure whose designation required higher-level awareness. The delay between local authority and federal confirmation created a gap filled only by uncertainty. The officers on scene felt that gap without being told, and it influenced every movement they made. No one raised their voice, yet the silence itself became more intense. When the confirmation signal finally began to approach the local channel, it did not arrive as drama but as structured acknowledgement, the kind that changes context without announcement. The woman did not move when she sensed the shift. Instead, she remained steady, her presence unchanged while the environment around her subtly recalibrated. The situation had not ended, but it had clearly entered a new phase, one where assumptions would no longer guide decisions, and every next step would require full awareness of who was actually standing at the center of the event. The morning air outside the suburban neighborhood was unusually still as the final sequence of events unfolded, carrying the weight of everything that had led to this moment. After hours of confusion, miscommunication, and escalating tension between law enforcement presence and an unseen legal authority working behind the scenes, the situation had shifted into something no one on the street had anticipated. The black woman at the center of it all, calm but visibly focused, stood near the entrance of her home with her posture steady, her expression composed in a way that contrasted sharply with the uncertainty surrounding her. She was not just a resident under scrutiny, but a state attorney with active federal jurisdiction, a fact that had not been properly recognized at the beginning of the encounter. Around her, the presence of multiple patrol units had gradually de-escalated, their earlier urgency replaced with careful reassessment as internal confirmations began arriving through official channels. The white officer who had initially initiated the interaction now appeared noticeably unsettled, not from fear, but from the realization that procedural steps had not aligned with the legal reality of the situation, and that critical verification had been delayed far longer than protocol would allow. What changed everything was a single secure call placed earlier, one that reached a retired Navy SEAL now working in Federal Protective Coordination, who immediately escalated the matter through proper command verification channels rather than speculation or assumption. Within minutes, command-level clarity arrived, not as spectacle, but as confirmation. The woman in question held authority that superseded the assumptions being made at the scene, and the operation around her residence required immediate restructuring. The energy in the environment shifted from confrontation to correction, as officers adjusted positions, lowered their intensity, and began transitioning into standard protective protocol rather than enforcement posture. No dramatic confrontation occurred, no chaos erupted, only the quiet but undeniable correction of a system realigning itself to verified truth. The woman did not raise her voice. Instead, she spoke briefly into her phone once more, confirming that the situation was stabilizing and that no further escalation was necessary. The officer closest to her stepped back slightly, his expression reflecting a mixture of professional recognition and personal reflection, understanding that assumptions made in the field can collapse instantly when incomplete information meets verified authority. As the last confirmation came through official dispatch channels, the surrounding vehicles began to reposition, not in retreat, but in orderly withdrawal consistent with resolved status. The neighborhood slowly returned to its normal rhythm, with distant lawn sprinklers and passing cars replacing the earlier tension. What remained was not conflict, but the aftermath of misunderstanding corrected by protocol, communication, and authority properly identified. The black state attorney stood for a moment longer at the entrance of her home, looking across the now calmed street, her presence steady and unshaken, before turning back inside, leaving behind a scene that had transformed not through force, but through truth being finally recognized at the right level, at the right time, in the correct chain of command.